Hi, my name is Tony, and today we're going to look at Fusion's 3D tools right inside of DaVinci Resolve. So I'm going to assume that you have an understanding of the basic layout and functionality of Fusion while we're working today, but if you don't, that's fine. You can always go back to the overview video where we cover that in much more detail. So the purpose of today's video is to kind of go over an introduction to 3D. We're going to be doing some 3D text. We're going to be animating the 3D text. We're going to build our own custom materials for that, as well as a custom reflection map. So I'm kind of excited about that. Next, we're going to build a 3D particle system to kind of help give our camera some nice movement. And then we're going to finish all that off in 2D, adding some glows, some light rays, and that's going to really bring our image together and add some nice pop. All right, enough talking. Let's get into Fusion. So let's add our 3D text. And I'm going to hit the number 1 key and just load it into viewer 1. So one thing that you should know as we're working inside of the 3D environment is that it is an actual real 3D environment. So we're not dealing with 2.5D, right? In a real 3D environment, you can have actual objects, materials, real 3D cameras. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but just want you to be aware of that. So real quick, to navigate inside of the 3D environment, I'm going to hit the middle mouse button and hold my Option key down, and that's going to let me orbit. If I just press the middle mouse button, I can move left or right. And if I hit my Command key, I can scroll my mouse wheel and zoom in and out. So that's just the basic ways of moving around inside of our 3D environment. Okay, let's add some text. So Fusion, let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, let's give this text some extrusion. Increase the depth. Let's take a look, a little bit more. And give it a little bit of a bevel depth and a bevel width. Okay, so this is just a nice white plain text. You can come in here and change the color in the shading tab. You can change the color, but this is just really one solid color. And we want to be able to have a little more dimension. So I would like to create something that kind of resembles like a nice glass look and feel. So let's build our custom material. Let's start off with a ward shader. Let me move this up here. I'm going to pipe that into a reflect node. And let's view that in our viewer. All right. Right now we have nothing going on, so let's give our ward a little bit of color. And we're going to bring down our alpha and our opacity. Okay, this is the base for our material. Let's go and create our custom reflection map. So I'm going to start by adding a shape layer, shape 3D, excuse me. Put that in viewer 1. Next, I'm going to add not a 3D camera, but a spherical 3D camera, and that's going to let us create a map so we can use for our spherical reflection. So let's add that now. If I can. All right, spherical camera. There we go. It's automatically added a 3D merge. I'm going to load that 3D merge in my viewer 1. And let's zoom out a little bit. All right, I'm going to move my shape 3D. There we go. All the way out here. And I'm going to move it all the way to the edge of this grid. Now, why am I doing that? Well, I want to be able to add more shape 3D objects. So instead of actually creating individual shape nodes, I'm going to use the duplicate 3D node. That's going to be much more efficient, and I'll show you that right now. So let's add the duplicate 3D node. Now, there's also a duplicate 2D node as well. So just be aware that there's a 2D version and a 3D version. So let's make sure we select the 3D version. And in the inspector, let's make about 25 copies. And nothing's happened yet, but I'm going to click and drag this on-screen control for the duplicate node, and you can see right away I've just duplicated this one object 25 times. So again, just a nice efficient way of being able to quickly duplicate and create stuff. All right, I'm going to name this box. I'm going to select my Merge 3D and add another shape 3D. And let's name this one Top. Oops, let's try that again. And let's go to the Controls tab for our shape plane. Let's scale it up. Let's unlock the X, Y, and Z. And just make this a little bigger. All right. So now we need to take the X rotation and put it at -90. So I know this looks kind of weird and not sure what we're doing, but it'll all come together here once we finish setting it up. All right, I'm going to copy my top node. I'm going to select my Merge 3D. I'm going to paste it. Now I'm going to rename this one Bottom, and I'm just going to bring this down and move it over. Let's go back to the top node and just make this a little bit bigger while we're here. We'll put this at 20. And let's go back to the bottom one. Let's do the same thing as well. And let's bring that down a little bit. Okay, we're going to do this one more time. I'm going to select my bottom node, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to paste it in my node editor and just drag it into the Merge 3D. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed, but in 2D, we have, you can only put a foreground and background together. So you're stacking, you're bringing your layers together, you're merging them together. In 3D, you can actually use a merge node and just keep adding layers. Because we're in a 3D environment, it's much easier just to keep adding multiple merge nodes. So you don't need to have multiple merge nodes unless you want to in 3D. All right, so let's rename this node to Side. And we're going to bring it up. We're going to get rid of our rotation. Just going to reset that. I'm going to orbit around, bring it to the side, and let's change the color of this one to like a dark gray. Okay, so this looks a little funky, I know, but trust me, it'll come together here. Let's now take it out of the 3D environment and bring it into the 2D environment. So before I mentioned that Fusion has a real 3D environment, well, think of it as if you were to go to a 3D application and you made an animation. How would you get that animation into your compositor or your layer-based system? Well, you would have to render it out of the 3D application and then bring it in as a 2D image. And that's kind of the same thought process here. We're not rendering to disk, but we're just rendering it to a 2D image. So we'll come out of our 3D environment using a render node, and now we can go into our 2D environment. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to add a 3D renderer. This is going to allow us to go into 2D. So because we're using an because we're using a spherical camera, now we've got an equirectangular image that we can use for our sphere map. So let's add a spherical map. And now we're going to take the sphere map and we're going to put it right into our reflect node. Now before I do that, actually, normally we left click on the output of our nodes and we pipe it into our nodes. But for this time, I'm going to right click and drag and put it over my reflect node. And now it's going to give me the option to click on whatever input I want. So if your node has multiple inputs, this is a great way. If you're not sure which input to go to, it's a great way to look at it. So I want this to go into the color material, and right away you can see that now we've got some reflections happening for our material. So in my sphere map, let's go ahead and turn on angular mapping. Okay, so now what is left is to take our 3D text and connect it with this material. So we can't do it by default. So what we're going to have to do is replace the material. So let me load my 3D text into viewer 1, and let's zoom in over here so we can see how it will look. With my 3D node text selected, let's add a replace material 3D. This is going to allow us to put our custom material onto our text. So I'm going to drag our reflect node into my replace material. Now I need to load it into the viewer, so I'm going to hit 1, load it into the viewer. All right, we can see now that we have this interesting, cool looking glass effect for our text. Kind of cool. Now we're going to come back to the sphere map. We're going to adjust some of its parameters as we start animating and building and having our 2D look effects. So we'll come back to that. Okay, let's do some animating. Now, in our last lesson, we just animated the tracking and kind of did it globally. For this one, we want to do something a little more dynamic. So I would like to sequentially animate the text so they follow each other. And to do that, we're going to use modifiers. And modifiers are a great way to add more complexity to parameters. It's basically, at its core, an expression with a GUI. It's much more than that. So let's jump right in. How do we do that? In our text tab, right inside our stylized text box, I'm going to right click. And now this has given us a bunch of other options to look at. So I'm going to click on the follower, and this is that sequential text animation engine that's built right into Fusion. It's the same one that's for the 2D text and 3D text. So here we go. Let me position this. I'm going to go to the shading tab. I'm going to close down this property. I'm going to go to position and rotation. So let's set a keyframe. But first, actually, I need to figure out where I want my animation to stop. So let's go and say around frame 38. Frame 38 feels like the right frame. And let's set a keyframe for our offset Z and a keyframe for our Y. So we're first setting our end keyframe, and now we need to go back and set our beginning keyframe. So let's go to the beginning, and let's just take our offset and move it up. I'm going to double click in here and hit the number 1, hit enter. And then for our Y rotation, I'm just going to type in 90. And then let's play that back. All right, not bad. So I'm just going to take our auto render range and just isolate it to the area that we're working on. I don't want to render the whole or preview the whole clip. So I'm going to hold Command and click and drag right inside the time ruler. And that's going to just preview that specific area. Okay. So we have our text animating. It's not animating sequentially yet. Let's click on our time tab, and then we're going to just increase the delay. All right, so you can start to see there that our text is now animating one after the other. I'm going to come into the 3D options here, and I'm just going to remove this grid so we can see that a little better. There we go. All right, it's coming together. Now, while we're here, I just want to smooth out this animation. So I'm going to open up the spline editor. I'm going to click on my stylized text, and that's revealed all the keyframes. For this, I'm just going to quickly select both of my end keyframes for my offset and my Y angle. I'm going to hit Shift S, and that's just going to smooth out those keyframes so as it lands, it's going to land nice and slow. All right, that's looking good. Let's close down the spline. Okay, so we've animated some text. Let's go ahead and add a camera now. So I got my replace 3D material selected. I'm going to add a 3D camera. Fusion's already made a merge 3D for me. Now I need to view this merge 3D so I can see what's going on. So I'm going to hit the number 1 key, and I'm going to hit the number 2 key. So I've loaded this one node into both views. And I'll tell you why here in a second. So let me just adjust this a little bit so we can see it better. Okay, so on my left view, I've got the perspective view, right? I can move around, adjust all my properties as needed. In my right view, I have the same thing, but I'm going to change that. So down here at the bottom left, where it says perspective, I'm going to click on Camera 3D. Because I have a Camera 3D piped into my Merge 3D, I have access to that view. So basically now I'm viewing the POV of that camera. So we don't see anything. We need to move our camera into place. So to do that, one way that I like to do this is instead of going to the inspector and tweaking and adjusting each individual frame, I just come to the perspective view and I just find my frame here in the perspective view. Let me move out here so I can get a better look. Something like this, a little bit closer. Now I'm going to right click in this perspective corner down here and say copy this POV to my camera. So right away in viewer 2 you can see Fusion has taken the camera and moved it right where I told it to move. So it's kind of a cool way of animating as well. You don't have to go and try to move the x-axis and the y-axis and the z-axis. You just use the perspective view with your mouse and orbit around and then say copy that. Okay, so this is kind of where I want to land. I want my camera to land right here. So let's scrub our timeline and just see where we can land. All right, so let's go right at frame 30. This is where our camera is going to land. So let's go to our camera control. Excuse me, let's first click on the camera node, go to the camera controls. Now I need to set keyframes for my X, Y, and Z offset. So one way you can do that for most parameters is just actually right click on the name of the parameter and say animate the translation group. So that's just going to give me keyframes for all three right away. And I'm also going to do one for the Z rotation as well. So let's go to the beginning, and then let's actually do this inside of the camera view. So I'm going to hold the command key and just scroll down. So I'm actually animating. You can see the inspector is moving, and I'm just moving my camera right where I need to. And then I'm going to put my Z rotation at 90, and let's watch this back. One thing to note is if you make an adjustment inside a parameter, you hit enter and you hit the space bar, you need to be able to click outside of that parameter, then hit the space bar, and the playback will work. All right, so on the left view, you see my perspective view. The right view, you see what's happening inside the camera. And that's not bad. Okay, let's open up the spline editor just to smooth out these keyframes. I don't like having static linear keyframes. So I'm starting to have a bunch of keyframes here. I'm not sure which one is which. I'm just going to turn off my 3D text. I have my camera selected. Again, I'm just going to select all these keyframes at the end, my end keyframes. I'm going to hit Shift S, and that's just going to smooth those out. Cool. So right now our camera's twisting, coming back, and landing. It'd be nice if it was kind of still moving away, right? That we're still kind of pushing away from it. So we're going to go to the end of our time ruler, and we're just going to grab our offset and push it out a little bit. Let's see what that does for us. There we go. I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but it still has a subtle slight movement. Just kind of nice. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Can never go wrong with a bigger movement, right? All right, so what do we have? We've got our text animating, we've got our camera animating. Now let's go ahead and add some particles. Actually, while I'm here, I'm just going to select all these nodes. It's kind of bothering me. I'm just going to hit Command G. I'm just going to put those into a group just so it's nice and tidy. Okay, let's talk particles. So in the effects library, before we talk particles, there's all these different templates that you can look from. Fusion comes preloaded with different backgrounds, generators, lens flares, particles, shaders. So just go through there, take a look at the particles, or take a look at the shaders. It's a great way to deconstruct and just to see how things are constructed and built. So there's firework particles, there's smoke particles, there's all sorts of different particles for different types of designs and needs. We're going to use the tools and build it ourselves, but I just want you to see all the different tools that are available for the particles. So we've got all sorts of things from causing friction or different types of forces, gravity, wind, you name it. You can spend an endless amount of time in particles. There's so much that I still need to look at and learn. All right, to use particles though, no matter what you're doing, either if it's 2D or for 3D, you always need to have two nodes. You need to have a particle generator and a particle renderer. Without those nodes, you're not having any particles. So let's add a particle emitter, and let's add a particle renderer. Okay, now by default, it's set, the particle renderer is set to 3D, so we can just pipe this right in to our merge 3D. And you can see right there is our little particle. So let's start creating and building our particle system. Okay, first of all, I want to go to the region. This is where we're telling the emitter where and how to generate particles. So right now it's set to this little sphere. I'm going to change it to a cube, and then let's adjust the size of it and the height of it. And let's just move along here, adjust the depth. I want to see where my camera is landing. I'm going to click out where my end keyframe is just real quick to see where my camera is landing so I can adjust the dimensions. Oh, let's go more than that. Okay, that's good. Let's increase the width. Let's try 2. Let's do 3. Let's do 2 for that. Maybe 3. Let's see what we got. Let's watch this. So, I mean, this is kind of nice. I'm in 3D. I'm putting particles. I'm just playing back. I'm not sure how big I want my particle box to be, but I think this is going to work. Let's just adjust. Now let's keep it wide. Let's adjust the height. All right. If we need to adjust it, we'll come back and adjust it. Let's go to our Style tab for our particles. Right now it's set to point. I'm going to change this to line. And let's see here. We have a line. Let's go to the size controls and just crank up the size controls. Yes, we have lines. Okay. Let's go to our velocity. Add some velocity. So it's going in the wrong direction. So let's go ahead and change the angle to -90. So now it's, as you can see here, the particles are going away from the camera into the background. Now, this line is not lining up properly, so I'm just going to come to the Y rotation and change that. Before I do that though, right now the particles are set to always face camera. Just go ahead and deselect that. And then let's change this to 90 degrees. All right. Oh, I changed the variance. Okay, let's reset the variance and let's go to our Y rotation. There we go. Okay, look at that. Not bad. So we have a cool, interesting looking star field that's happening. Camera's flying past our text. Particles are flying past us as well. I think this is good. Let's go back to our Style tab here. And then let's just create some size variance. Right? We don't want everything to be uniform. You're making, computer-generated graphics. Everything's so clean and uniform. Let's break it up. So we're going to do some size variance. I'm also going to click into size over life and just adjust how it's born and how big it gets. Now the same option, so if I'm in the spline editor and I select a keyframe, I hit Shift S, that smooths out that keyframe. Now in the inspector, you'll have some instances like this where we have a spline as well, and the same thing works. Shift S will smooth out that keyframe for us as well. So whenever you see a spline, doesn't matter which panel it is, you can always select it, you can always hit Shift S or adjust it as needed. Okay, so I think this is looking all right. Oh, let's go to the fade controls. Can't forget the fade controls. We're going to fade it in a little bit, and we're going to really crank down on the out. Okay, let's go to the emitter tab, and let's just bring down the lifespan. Again, I'm just playing around. I'm just kind of tweaking and building it. There's so many different options that you can use here and go crazy with, so just bear with me as we're kind of just finding this together. All right, lifespan variance, good. Now, I do not want my particles to be animating the whole time. I would like for them to fade away. So I'm going to go to the beginning of my clip. I'm going to change the number count to about 400. I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to move one frame over. I'm going to set another keyframe and change this to 0. So now I've just told Fusion, oops, here we go, let me click out. I've just told Fusion to generate a certain amount of particles at a certain point in time, and then they'll fade away. So you can see that here in our left view, they're starting to fade away. Okay, let's change the number variance just a little bit. Let's bring up our lifespan. Okay. Not bad. One thing I do want to go back to, you're going to have to forgive me. I'm constantly tweaking all the time, trying to make things look a little bit better and cool. Let's go back to our reflection map here. In the spherical map, we're just going to animate the rotation just so we can get some cool features. Let's see here. Let's just move this around. I want to bring out this reflection as much as possible. All right, so I'm going to set keyframes here at the very end of my clip. And let's go back here and let's just move this around a little bit. All right, let's see what that looks like. Oops, let's open up our render range now. So you can see I just animated the rotation of the sphere map, and it's given this effect that the reflections are moving on the text. So just a nice little subtle thing. We don't want anything to be too static, so just giving a little movement here and there really adds a nice touch. Okay, I think I'm good with that. Let's close this down. All right, so we're in our 3D environment. Again, we need to go back into 2D. Now we want to start tweaking our look of our image, and we're going to add some glows and all that stuff, so we need to go into 2D. And we're going to do that with our 3D renderer node. So I have my merge node selected. I'm going to add my renderer 3D node. Let's look at that. Okay, well, what happened to our particles? Well, what happened was the renderer 3D has a couple of different options for you to choose from. So this render type here is set to software renderer. We're going to change that to OpenGL. And there you go. We've got our particles, we've got our glass look, and that is looking a little bit better. All right, also, I'm going to come over here to the settings tab, and I'm going to turn on motion blur. Gotta love that motion blur. Let's see what we have here. Nice. Okay. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so now we're just going to start adding some 2D filters just to kind of really bring this image and give it some nice pop. So I'm going to turn off the view for my Merge 3D, and I'm just going to use one viewer right now. So I'm going to click this monitor button, and it's just going to isolate this view for me, just so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Okay, so let's go ahead and add this node called filter node. I love the filter node. It's so underrated. I'm going to load that in to my viewer. I'm going to change this to Sobel. So it's just kind of giving us this cool little outline. And I want to reapply this back over my renderer. So if you're coming from a layer-based motion graphics application, you're probably familiar with pre-comping, so a composition within a composition. And when I was working on layer-based applications, I had tons of pre-comps. So what we just did right now is basically the same thing. It's a pre-comp. But because we're in nodes, it's so much easier, it's so much more efficient, it's quicker to just grab something and comp it right back over itself. You can see it, you always have access to it. So just keep that in mind when you're relating that to other applications. Okay, so after the filter, I'm going to add a blur node just to kind of soften that edge a little bit. Yeah, right about there. And let's look at our merge. Okay, so here's before, and here's after. So you can kind of see it's giving it this nice little pop. I'm going to just blend this down, just dial it back. Just dial it back some. Bring down the alpha gain. And let's see what we have here. Before and after. Before and after. All right, not bad. Now I would like my particles to actually still be lingering on, so I'm going to go back to my particles real quick and just increase the lifespan. Let's see here. Yeah. There we go. That's much better. Okay, great. Let's keep moving on. All right, so let's add a little color correction. And for this, we're just gonna bring down our gamma a little bit, pump up the gain. Let's add a glow. Now we're gonna just increase the glow size a little bit. Maybe pump up the glow. If you want to be able to toggle on the effect, it's kind of just to see what it is you came from and where you're going. Right next to the name, there's this little switch that you can click on and off. You can also hit Command P, and that'll turn off, on and off that node. So you can see we're adding this nice little glow. I'm going to add another glow. This time it's going to be a soft glow. Let's view that. That's a little bit big. I'm going to use a threshold. And I'm just going to isolate to these highlighted areas. I'm going to bring the gain down. We don't want to go too crazy. We just want to add a nice little subtle punch. Okay, so you can see we're just adding just a nice subtle punch. Okay, cool. All right, let's go ahead and add a little bit of atmosphere. Right now we're kind of in just on a black background, but we want to add some atmosphere. So I'm going to add a background node. Now in this case, excuse me, the background node is another underrated tool as well. So obviously we can use it to generate a solid color, in this case black, but under the type you have all these other options. So we have a gradient and you have gradient types. Let's look at that and let's open up our two monitors and put our background in viewer 1. So you can see here that you have all these options to make different gradients. And for our purposes, I'm going to change this gradient type to radial. And let's change this color around. I'm just going to find a nice little shade of blue. And let's change this other color, nice and dark. So it's a great way of creating little vignettes. You can also use it to drive other filters. So you can change and morph the background node to use for displacement maps, for other types of blurs. We'll use it for a blur node actually later on. So definitely explore the background node. There's a lot of options that you can play with. Okay, so this looks nice. It's too clean. So again, I want to break it up, add some dimension to it. So we're going to do that with fast noise. So I'm going to add a fast noise. Let's view the fast noise. Let's crank up the detail. Let's bring down the scale some. And let's pipe the output of our fast noise right into the mask input of our background. Let's view that. And so right away we have the color and the gradient properties of our background, but we're using the fast noise to break it up and give it some dimension. So that's going to be really nice. So let's look at our merge. All right, not bad. Let's go to our apply mode and just go to screen. And that's not looking too bad. Okay, we might come back later and tweak that, but I'm good with that for now. Okay, what's next? All right, we're going to add emboss. So back to the filter node. I love the filter node. Oops, wrong F2. Here we go. So we're going to add a little bit of emboss. Now what is it doing? It's just adding a little bit of extra sharpness and crunch to our image. Just a personal taste. After this, we're going to add some Very Blur. I like the Very Blur. It's a cool little tool to use. Definitely explore it. So right now, nothing is happening with this Very Blur. We need to be able to control it and tell the Very Blur which part of the image we want to blur. And we're going to do that again with another background node. So let's add a background node. Let's view that in viewer 1. And we're going to change this to our gradient. This time, instead of going to radial, we're going to go to reflect. Now I'm going to grab this on-screen control here and bring in my gradient. I'm going to use this black and white image to control which part of my Very Blur I want to be blurred and which part I want not to be blurred. So let's pipe in the background into our Very Blur. And just so we can see the difference, we're just going to crank up the Very Blur. All right, so you can see now that the edges are all blurred while the center is mostly in focus. So let's adjust the background so we can get it right where we want it. Now, if you adjust this gradient triangle here at the bottom, you can see that I'm opening it up over here as I move it to the right. So this is a great way of just kind of tweaking and adjusting. Okay, let's go back to the very blur. I think that's good. Let's bring this down. We don't want to blur it that much. So here's off. Just want to do it a little bit. Let's toggle that on and off. Okay, nice. Again, just adding dimension to our image and breaking it up where we can, keeping it sharp where we want to, but breaking it up where we can. Okay, we're almost there. Rays, let's add some rays, some little light rays. We can't go wrong with light rays. All right, that's pretty big. Let's try to bring this down a little bit. Just using these controls here, and really just to taste, right? There's no really rhyme or reason or method. It's just to taste and to the design. In this case, it's kind of a little too much everywhere, so I'm just going to isolate it with an ellipse mask and just kind of soften this edge out. And let's just click through and see what we have so far. We're just kind of clicking through, checking everything. Not bad. Not bad. Okay, this is pretty good. I'm liking this. So what I'm going to do real quick, I'm just going to change it up. I'm going to actually animate this ellipse. So let's see here. Right about here, I want my rays to kind of kick in. So let's do frame 20. Let's put a keyframe on our width and our height. Let's jump over to about frame 46, and let's set keyframes again. Now, I've just set beginning and end keyframes. I haven't changed anything, but just so I can mark my beginning and ends. Now, this is the end. This is where I want my ellipse to open up to. I'm going to go to the beginning, and I'm just going to bring the size of this down. So that way, our ellipse is opening up, and you'll start to see how the rays are now being shown as the ellipse opens up. So you don't actually have to animate the rays itself. You can just use a mask to control it and animate as needed. I'll leave that for now. Maybe we'll come back and adjust that a little bit later. Okay, let's go back to our effects library and back to those templates that we talked about earlier. Under Tools, I've got this cool little plugin called Chromatic Aberration. I'm just going to add a little bit of chromatic aberration. And lastly, we're going to add some grain. Got to use my favorite filter, the filter node. Okay, let's click on grain, and let's just crank it up 2 by 2. There you go. You can see we've added a little bit of grain just to kind of break things up, keep it feeling nice and cool. Let's make this 1. All right, not bad. Okay, this is pretty good. There's so many different ways you can just take this and go with it. This is really just a taste, but you can go crazy. In fact, I want to add a little bit of a foreground piece, so I'm going to add a shape 3D. So let's go back to our 3D environment. Let's create a shape 3D, just because I can't stop tinkering. Let's load that in Viewer 2. Let's quickly change this to a cube. And, you know, again, it's just so nice to be able to repurpose things very, very quickly. So we created our custom material earlier. I'm just going to take out of that reflect and pipe it right into our shape 3D. So we kind of have that same material. We're using it on our cube. Okay, let's put 2 viewers up so we can see what we're doing. Let's actually do this here. Let's go back to the end. And let's put this in our Viewer 2. I'm going to take the output of my Shape 3D and drop it into my Merge 3D. So I want to add this little shape just as a foreground element. So let me go to Perspective View, and let's just move this right where we want it. So I'm going to go to the end and just adjust and tweak. So I've been going to the inspector, making changes, coming back. You don't have to. You've got these on-screen controls up here where you can change and do stuff right inside the viewer. So we can change rotation of our object. We can also change the scale of our object. Oh, I went too far. Let's see here. Let's try that a little bit more. So that way you just stay right inside of the viewer and do all of your adjusting as needed. Okay, just gonna move this over a little bit. I am gonna change the size down in the inspector. Fusion has to process both the output and the 3D for this. Okay, that is not bad. Let's bring it in a little closer. Anytime you can give dimension and shape to your composition by adding a foreground or background element, just helps keep things nice and real. Okay, so what I would like to do is blur this, this little cube and use it as a foreground to kind of create some sort of depth of field effect. Now right now I have the shape 3D going into my merge 3D and out to the renderer 3D. So I'm going to break it apart, isolate it, that way I can add it back into my pipeline and tweak that just specifically. So let's disconnect our shape 3D and let's select our merge 3D and our renderer 3D. I'm going to copy that. We're just going to paste it down here. Now I'm going to take the output of this shape 3D and put it into the merge 3D. So if I were to load the render 3D into my viewer, well, nothing's really happening. It's just sitting there. So I need to add the camera. So I don't have to copy and paste the camera. I can just take the output from my camera and branch it right into my merge 3D. And just like that, now I have all that same camera data, camera animation happening right here in this separate pipeline. Okay, that's good. So now we're ready to add this back into our node structure. So let's find a good spot for it. I think after this glow might be good. I'm just going to select these nodes, move them down, select my glow, add a merge, and then take the output of this, drop it right into my merge. And then let's view the output of our final comp. Okay. So do you see what I did there? I did a whole new 3D foreground object, repurposed my camera, did a whole new renderer, and now I'm piping it back in 2D. So let's add a blur node to this. And we're just going to crank this up. We're going to select our merge. Now, when you're in the merge node, it took me a while. You have all your different composite modes, screen, overlay, soft, hard light. I could not find the add overlay. It's actually the alpha gain. So if you adjust the alpha gain, that's the equivalent of add, but it's even better because you can actually dial it in as much as you want. So it's not just a button you click on, you can dial it in to taste. So I'm going to bring down this alpha gain. That's the same as add. And you can see it's just peeking in right there on the bottom of the F. Maybe we'll add some brightness contrast, and we'll crank this up a little bit more. Go back to our blur. Let's just go crazy with our blur. See what happens. 200. Okay, let's go back to our merge. Bring down our blend a little bit. Okay, so what has this done? Well, let's click through and find out. Okay, great. So let's take a look at that. I'm just going to click at the beginning of my comp and see how that looks. All right. Not bad. I'm liking this. We got our rays, got our particles, got a nice little foreground piece. Okay, so I would say this is a good place to go ahead and stop. But before we do that, I want to talk about really the whole dimension of Resolve, right? We're in Fusion, but there's so many other parts of Resolve that really brings it all home together. So let's jump into the color page. I'm going to go to the color page, and right away, it's available for us. Our animation is available for us here in the color page. Now, when I'm doing motion graphics, I'll design in Fusion, I'll edit it to music on the edit page, I'll add my sound effects in the Fairlight side. But really, the color is where you can hone it in and bring it together. So there's a lot of other effects that you can add right here on the color page on top of the motion graphics that you just built. So you can add even more glows, camera shake, other distortions, or just kind of clean up your motion graphics. A lot of times you need that final color finesse, maybe something to the shadows or to the highlights. So this is where you really would polish off your motion graphics piece. And essentially, it's not available anywhere else in this type of platform. So don't be afraid to delve in and to mix the two together. So let's just take a look. I kind of added some nodes already. They're turned off, so we're just going to select them and turn them on. So I've added, let's see here, what have I added? I added some lens reflections, some prism blurs, and some glows. So again, it's up to you to taste based on how your creative is and what you're doing. But you can really just take your animations, your visual effects to the next level because you have the ability just to click one little button and go right over to the color tab. So I hope we learned something today and we had fun along the way. This is just a taste. There's so much more that you can do with the 3D nodes. There's a lot we haven't covered. And if you, again, need to look at the first video, go right ahead. But thanks for watching and come back again soon.